Thanks for pressing play. This is Christopher Lochhead, Follow Your Different, a celebration of the people, companies, and ideas that stand out. And we are sponsored by our friends at Oracle NetSuite. To get a 1-hour growth review with an expert in your industry, go to netsuite.com/different. That's right. For listeners of this podcast, NetSuite is offering 1 hour with an expert who can help you unpack the opportunities for growth in your business at netsuite.com/different. On this episode, we hang out with my good buddy, none other than the growth master, category guru to the Fortune 100, and author of one of my absolute favorite books, Super Consumers, The Incomparable Eddie Yoon. And Eddie, being the kind gentleman that he is, invited me to help him co-author an article for the Harvard Business Review. And it seems like it's caused a lot of discussion, and so we thought we could unpack it. So today we have a conversation on why you should quit your corporate job and go solo. We thought it'd be fun to get into this because there's been such a big reaction since the HBR article came out. There have been some questions and concerns, and so we unpack some of the financial realities of leaving an executive job and going solo, and share both of our experiences in that regard. We talk about what Eddie calls the power of creating your own personal IPO as the ultimate way to monetize yourself, and on the personal side, the emotional business case for going solo. In this episode, you'll gain some very practical insights if you're thinking about making this move yourself. And even if you're not, if you're just thinking about how do I have a more legendary career, we really dig into the power of designing your career in the context of your life. Go to lochhead.com to check out the show notes for this episode. You'll find the key takeaways and more on Eddie Yoon's background. Now, hey ho, let's go.
I think it really resonated in a way that even surprised me.
Well, and the interesting thing to me is, and look, I may be dealing with an incorrect assumption. You can educate me, but my assumption is that the Harvard Business Review is mostly read by Fortune 2000 type executives.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. I don't know the specifics on it, but I have talked to Sarah McConville, one of their executives. She was the former CMO there, and they clearly have super consumers, is what she said. This dynamic of a small set of people driving a ton of their revenue and engagement. But she did also say that the way in which people engage is kind of, whatever the equivalent of a life event changes, but for your career. Like you get promoted, you go to a new company, new industry, and you have no idea what you're doing, and you're scared that someone's going to find out. So you turn to HBR to kind of get smart quick on it and stuff. And
it's kind of the executive shrink in a magazine, right?
Yeah,
or I guess a website.
Totally. And it does seem like people, to your point, you have kind of that Fortune, ex-executive that's reading it. But then it does seem like there's a lot of people early in their careers or midway through and trying to figure out what's next. They have a very diverse audience, and sounds like you got a whole crew of solopreneurs out there on there too. So,
well, and the interesting thing, I sort of thought as a magazine that's primarily read by executives, I wasn't sure how this piece would land, but there are over 20 comments on their website, and I don't know, more than that again on social media, a lot on LinkedIn and so forth and so on.
You should see the Instagram post that they did. I think it has like over 1,000 likes and just.
Oh, I didn't see that.
Yeah, it's funny. Like I don't really have a good feel for their timing of when they do what on, like usually Twitter and LinkedIn, and Facebook, but then that's where I was kind of surprised by is, just the level of engagement that they've clearly shown there and stuff. And so,
oh shit, dude, it's it's over 4,000 on LinkedIn, on Instagram.
yeah. Isn't that amazing? And I would have never guessed.
And the comments are just go on and on and on here.
Yes.
Wow.
Well, and I'm just, continually surprised by all of this of I just would have guessed that LinkedIn would have been a more logical place where the engagement would be high, but apparently Instagram.
Well, and it is high on LinkedIn, from what I can tell.
Yeah. No.
There have been all kinds of random people posting it and copying or pinning. Fucking A, get your tagging you and I. So let's break this thing down. I mean, it seems a very fascinating thing that many top performers, some of the highest earners. In some cases, some folks who have stock plays in the company
Mm-hmm.
are exiting to become solopreneurs, or what my buddy Chris Ducker calls youpreneurs.
Yeah.
And of course, you've done this, and I've done this. But what do you think's really going on here, Dr. Yoon? I'm just gonna give you an honorary doctorate from the University of Different. Dr. Yoon sounds good on you.
Yeah, no, I mean it's well, you just said it. It's the people, like, there's probably a lot of square pegs are tired of being shoved into round holes, right? And that's kind of the vibe that I get from it, and that I've always kind of thought of, as we were writing this, the image of the Matrix, right? Like everyone's kind of a human battery for the hive, as it were, and then once you get extracted out, which seems scary, obviously, and but you realize there's a whole another world out there, and what you thought was reality actually wasn't, and stuff. And so, you just see this confluence everywhere of, whether it's technology or, some of it just like, you feel like we're on the early part of the S curve with this, because like I don't know that I would have done this without your encouragement and your example to do that. And it's when that happens, then you kind of got to go slowly one by one with it. But then between your book Niche Down and Dory Clark's work, and you see, when you start to see more and more people, and a lot of them are the ones that you really respect, and you're like, well, wait a minute, like, shouldn't I be following their example than what everybody else is doing? And
Yeah.
stuff?
Well, so let's go to, I think, what a big concern for most people is, which is, okay, so I'm in some job, I'm an executive. Oh, and by the way, I couldn't help myself. There was one of the negative comments on HBR.com, HBR's website, hbr.org. Somebody dinged us for saying, oh, well, you compared what people make when they go out as solopreneurs to the average U.S. income as opposed to the executive income. So just for the record, in the article, we say nearly 70% of solopreneurs report annual incomes of $100,000 to $250,000, which is nearly twofold times higher the average U.S. household. And to put a fine point on it, Glassdoor says the average U.S. executive has a salary of $121, or 121 and a half, if you want to be really specific. So, the reality is, if you look at the data on the economic side, people earn, and you tell me if I'm reading this right. Math was over for me in grade 10, or actually grade 3 if you want to be real. But the average solopreneur is doing as well, if not meaningfully better than she was doing as an executive. That's what the data seems to be telling us here, Eddie.
Yeah, regardless of if it's average household income or Glassdoor's average executive income, like the numbers are just so overwhelmingly higher. It's kind of like, like, put it this way: if solopreneur was an industry and a company, like everyone would be flocking to this industry, right?
Right.
It's in the same way that people did it for Silicon Valley or investment banking or consulting. It was like, if you're kind of agnostic as to what you want to do, you're going to chase where the money is, and the economic business case is clearly good, if not really, really good.
So, and I love it. And, listen, I'll be nothing but candid. This is your term, but I'm going to adopt it as my own. So maybe it could be our term. But you call this a personal IPO, this concept of, let's say for sake of argument, I'm making what Glassdoor says is the average, 121 and a half as an executive. But all my risk is in that one stock, so to speak. And it's illiquid, so to speak.
Yes.
And instead, I spread my risk around, let's say I earn that same 121 and a half, but I do it over 4 or 5 companies as monthly recurring consulting gigs, right?
Yep.
And we're calling that a personal IPO.
Yes.
And as somebody who has more recently gone through this than I have, why is this notion of a personal IPO one that you find compelling?
Well, it's funny because some of it is just kind of listening to you and the advice that you've given me, but also like what I recall was, I forget if I talked about this guy with you, Steve Hughes. He's kind of the godfather of organic foods in Boulder, Colorado, and he just a little bit of a sidetrack here, but like
we can have any sidetrack you want.
So he's one of the best food and beverage guys I've ever met. And when he was way back when he was at ConAgra, the CEO of ConAgra had a heart attack, Mike Harper, and was on a heart healthy diet. And he was like, this tastes like crap and we got to do something better. So Steve Hughes was tapped to create Healthy Choice, and he created from zero to over $1 billion in 5 years, which is maybe not so uncommon in Silicon Valley in technology, but in food and beverage, that's kind of crazy. So
yeah,
he did this, and what he tells a story about how, like, and this is like whatever 25 years ago, but for all the value that he created, I think he got like $200,000 in a bonus. That was over and above, which, for him at the time was like a lot of money, but then it was clearly like one of those like stories of entrepreneur creates something, sells too early to somebody else who then maximizes the value elsewhere and stuff, right?
Yes.
And so Steve, kind of files this away in his head, and he goes on to, he's the, bigger and better jobs. He's a CMO of Silk Soy Milk at White Wave, and then became the CEO of Celestial Seasonings and the like.
Wow.
But then my favorite story is that after all of this, he's like, forget this. I'm going to take myself public, which I'd never heard of anyone doing that before, but he launched a special purpose acquisition company. And I believe whatever the S1 or equivalent filing was, it says Keith Hernandez, like, I'm Steve Hughes. Give me $100 million and I'm going to do something good with it.
Right.
Like, that was it. Right. And so he went to, he was able to do that. He raised $100 million. He bought Smart Balance. And he's a fantastic marketer. And then, but very quickly realized that this was early on in the millennial thing, was that boomers were good with kind of manufactured science food, but millennials weren't. So he quickly pivoted to other acquisitions like Udi's and Evil and kind of natural stuff. That became Boulder Brands, which then they sold to Pinnacle Foods for over $1 billion and stuff. And then now he's the CEO of Sunrise Strategic Partners, which is a $200 million private equity fund in Boulder. And, this is he just living the dream. It's this personal IPO. Every entrepreneur in organic food comes to him first, because they don't go to the consumer private equity firms but they know that he has money and he's one of them. Right. And, he's got a great life. He's conscripting all these great kind of, executives out of big food who don't want to become senior executives, but want to run their own thing. I think his portfolio is Sunrise One. He's going to return, several X multiples of the committed capital they're just killing it. Right. And he's creating the next generation of brands for millennial moms is what he's kind of talking about. But, and you began to see, like, he's one example out, because I always thought of this whole personal IPO thing as more of a tech type driven thing. Like, you think about the cult of personalities in business, a lot more of them I feel like are in technology, but to see him do that in a digitized fashion was kind of like, this may be something that the timing is right, that more and more people can do this. And I just like that notion of, like, the multiple is higher when you go public, as you know well, right? Having done that a couple of times.
Yes.
And but the bridge to cross is what's your investor story? Who are your investors, and why should they believe that you're worthy of this multiple? And I think more people are figuring out that market exists, and why not me?
The other crazy thing, having been sort of a solopreneur for big chunks of my career, and been an executive and entrepreneur for other big chunks, and now I'm back to solopreneuring, and I'm done not doing that. Like that's all I'm doing now. We can talk about why if it matters. But, the interesting part is people are so afraid to break out because of that corporate mothership. And of course, a big part of it is financial. The other one, of course, in the United States, which I think is nuts, but it's there for us, is healthcare, right?
Yeah.
But the interesting thing is, if you can break through that, you and I, and we mention people some by name, some not by name in the article, but we know so many people who have done exactly what we talked about in this article, which is they break out, they confront the fear of, will I be able to make enough? Many of the ones that we both know not only have made as much, but in many cases made more. And we know many, I know some that have made more by a third or a half, or in some cases even doubled their income and work a third to half less. And so there's this other weird thing going on, which is if you're an outsider to the company, you're immediately smarter than anybody inside the company.
Yep.
Now, I know that's not always true, but like it's kind of true a lot, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Well,
it is.
Why is that?
I mean, who knows? That maybe that's the extra value that perspective gives you, or the value that you get from being, not part of the political, internal politics that are going on there, right? And or it's said differently, the value of when you just don't care anymore, right?
Yeah.
About the things that other people care about, and your willingness to speak the truth. And so, I think to your point, it's that perspective is so incredibly important, because I have all these war stories of when I was advising really huge companies that senior executives, my clients, some of them I would work with, they would say, I totally agree with what the strategy that you're recommending, and I believe it's the right thing to do, but just so you know, don't be hurt if in the meeting I go where the wind blows, because that's kind of what I got to do, right, to survive in corporate America or whatever. And so that freedom from that set of incentive and carrot and stick shackles, I just got to believe carries value with it. And I think to what you're saying is one of the things that I wish we had included in the article, but I come across it afterwards, was that ProPublica article that said that over half of folks in their 50s are going to be pushed out of their jobs earlier and under other circumstances than what they want to do. And I think that's the big part of it, is if you kind of accept the fact that certainty and security is an illusion wherever you're at, then this personal IPO thing doesn't become that scary anymore.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think while we didn't have the room to talk about it in this post, my buddy Kevin Maney's book, Unscaled, he talks about, there's it might even be a whole chapter if I remember, it's been a while, but on becoming a personal enterprise. And, the interesting thing to me is whether you're an employee or a solopreneur or not, this notion of a personal IPO, which is how am I over time going to monetize myself, which is sort of the way I think about it. What's the best way to monetize me? And then the second question is sort of, I need to take responsibility for myself. So I need to go back 200 years or so and say, there was a cobbler and a dressmaker and a farmer and a butcher and et cetera, et cetera. And we were all solopreneurs, right? Most people were farmers, but, and then all these other various things. And so today, I think if you want to have stability in your career, the best way to do that is to, whether you're technically an employee or not, is to think about yourself as somebody. And look, there's a lot of backlash against the quote unquote gig economy. But forget driving for Lyft for a second, right, or TaskRabbit or whatever. But like striking out is going from being an executive to being some kind of solopreneur in more than likely a service type business, right? That's generally what we've been talking about. Well, of course there are failures, and of course it's terrifying, and there's some downsides to this, of course. The reality is we are seeing a tremendous amount of success, and we're seeing at a time where I think you're right. I had gotten into this Facebook debate with a group of folks about people in Silicon Valley at 50 aging out, and I was more ignorant about it than I thought. And so, do you see this thing happening? Is this striking out on your own as a solopreneur? Is it a way to get in front of the I'm aging out train, so to speak?
Totally. I think of it as, to your point, like the older you get, presumably the more senior you're getting, and the more senior you get, the realization of it's a big old game of musical chairs, and every time you get promoted, there's fewer chairs the next level up and the next level up there, right? And so almost by definition,
where are you going to be when the music stops, Eddie?
Exactly. And I think this realization that the music is going to stop for the vast majority of people, right? Because
and that's the political thing we're driving at,
yes,
right?
Yes. Well, and I think the other thing that's kind of accelerated it has been, frankly, the kind of mercenary nature of 3G, right? Like, for these Brazilians, probably some of the most successful, private equity folks out there, at least within beer, but they take Burger King private and they put some young 30-year-old in charge of it and stuff. And what are they? It's not a guy that knows the restaurant business, not a guy that is a great, marketer. It's a finance guy, right? And what does he do? Well, let me do some, capital restructuring of spinning out franchises and own stores and this and that and deleveraging the company and blah, blah, blah. And I'm going to create EBITDA. And the reality is, for a lot of these large companies where, they're on the bad side of the category design, like they don't have a category design and the category is maturing and they're ready to be disrupted. What's the point of having somebody with 30 years of experience? I mean, that's the real kind of, mercenary way of looking at it. But if you can't grow it, you may as well put somebody who can strip cost out. And that can be a 30-year-old guy or gal versus a 50-year-old person with it.
Yeah, that's an interesting way of looking at it, I think. There's a lot of ageism as well.
Yes.
You hear people like Zuckerberg and many in Silicon Valley saying all sorts of as Ali G might say, ageistic comments. But, the interesting thing, and this is a tangent, but I had this aha, which is the position I think you want to be in north of 50, certainly north of 60, is one of you're either a senior executive who's running a big thing. So in your phrase, you're winning the game of musical chairs.
Yeah.
And or, because they're not, I think, necessarily mutually exclusive, but you've achieved maybe Yoda-like status, right?
Yes.
And this goes back to a different idea, and again, another one we couldn't get into in the article because of space, but this idea of position yourself or be positioned, right? If I'm a mid-level product manager, whether I'm in a Fortune 1000 consumer company or a tech company or whatever, and I'm 45 and I'm not on a path to being the, SVP or EVP of product management or marketing or whatever, I'm a mid-level person at 45. Yeah. Then I have some thinking to do, don't I?
Yes. Well, and I think it's one of the things that's been kind of interesting for me has been, this notion of there's all these metrics about like you should be this income or this net worth by this age or whatever. And I think a lot of people think about for their careers, I should be this title and at this prestige of company. And I actually think that's the wrong way to think about it. Like pedigree, I think has a half-life. And that's the thing that people don't really think about, especially as a Korean immigrant. My parents emphasize education. I'm like, your education is worth half as much the day after you graduate, and then after that, right? I mean, it's like
sort of like a new car, isn't it?
Like a new car. No, that's exactly right. And you're only as ever good as the last thing you ever did. And if you're bragging about your education when you're in your 40s and 50s, then what you're saying to me is that you clearly haven't accomplished anything in the last 20 years of worth, right?
Yeah.
And that really what you ought to be accumulating is beyond your title and the prestige of the company, the more pedigree stuff is, what are the testimonials and track record that you can look back on, and what did you accomplish and who did you accomplish it with? And those people, when they move around, because the other way to hedge the game of musical chairs is to be of value to somebody who does win the musical chairs bid, and then they pull you along somewhere else. Or, as you said, the testimonial route is you're the Yoda because it's again, this is the thing that drives me nuts about LinkedIn is that it's just structured the wrong way. It should be structured around outcomes, right? We took this company from X to Y. We took it public. We grew it $100 million. We launched this new product, none of which you can learn from your title, right?
Right.
And that I want to know the people who, as you said, be positioned or be positioned, the people who've routinely positioned a new product, a new brand, a new channel, a new category that's the things that I want to know. And
Yes.
those people, if you have those testimonials and track record, then my sense of it is that you'll be that much better prepared to win the game of musical chairs, or you can be Yoda, to your point, and either of which are escape
Yes.
hatches for you.
Yes. And actually, I like what you're saying, which is if you're 35, the right strategy is by the time I'm 45, I want to A, win the game of musical chairs, and B, become viewed as a Yoda. And that way I have all kinds of options.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's
Well,
definitely.
I think that realization, and that's why I always talk about the importance for me about journaling, and just I think it's so incumbent upon, you and me. And part of the reason why I think this article resonates is to get this idea, kind of shake people by the shoulders to say, look at, ain't no lifetime employment anywhere, and no one's going to be looking out for you. And you are always going to be on one of these paths, and you should be prepared for both. And beyond that is within the path of you're going to be, senior executive ding dong, as you say, or, personal IPO Yoda. You should learn which one you find joy in, right? And not everybody can be both, and not everybody gets energy out of both, because the senior executive thing, a lot of that is kind of, as you said about positioning, some of it is content and some of it is all the other stuff that comes with it, right?
I talked to, and it's not cool at all for me to say who, but one of the highest profile Silicon Valley entrepreneur CEOs of the last, couple decades. If I said this person's name, you would instantly relate to who this is. And what he shared with me in the conversation, in this case, he's still the CEO of the company, is how mundane and boring it is to be the CEO of this company, and all the operational stuff, and his lack of ability to be creative and think the way he did in the beginning, and so forth and so on. And, and we had this conversation, and I felt a little bit like, I sort of turned into Dr. Phil a little in the conversation, expressing his loneliness and expressing, the fact that, yes, he's been on the cover of all these magazines and celebrated and all this stuff, but the company is sort of far beyond exceeding its initial goal, incredible success. And now is really facing a little bit of a crisis is way too strong a word. This is a very thoughtful, intelligent, mature individual. And someone who is dealing with, let's just call it an existential topic, which is sort of, why are we still here? We achieved our first mission. That was really cool. They're sort of, it's sort of like, it reminded me a little bit of Microsoft. Remember when they had the BHAG of a computer on every desktop?
Yeah.
And when that generally got achieved, they sort of were aimless for a long, long time, for more than a decade. And it struck me that this founder CEO might be in a very similar situation, which is they massively overachieved their first goal in a relatively short period of time.
Yeah.
And now, at least for him, the boring, is boringness a word?
Sure.
The boringness of day-to-day, management meetings and this and that is not that interesting. And he's sort of, as a result, faced with, why are we really here? Why do we really matter? Why does it need to be us to take? What's the next thing, et cetera? And so, one of the things that we talk about in this article, and it seemed to be another thing that really resonated with people, so something that people wrote over and over again, is this emotional business case for striking out on your own as a solopreneur.
Yeah.
Why do you think emotional business case resonates the way that it does, Eddie?
Because I think everyone's heart is somewhat deceitful. Like, you think you know your feelings until one of the things my wife and I always kind of joke, a phrase we say, are you being sneaky angry? Like, seems like you're angry at me, but you might be angry about something else. And are you self-aware enough to figure out what that is? And so, find me somebody who's completely in tune with their emotions, and, I'll be the first to be like, how'd you get there? Right. And so, I just think your story of this CEO is so interesting, because one of the big kind of, warnings that I got from people before I went out to do the solopreneur thing is, hey, you're going to be lonely, right? And I can't tell you how that's so not true. Like, I have probably never been more, that the sense of camaraderie, but like maybe with fewer people, but with the people that I like the most and I respect the most. And I've gotten rid of all the other people that drain me of energy and stuff in my life, in my work life, and that's been fabulous. But like, I think the CEO situation is not uncommon, right? It's like, the more senior you get, the more likely people won't tell you the truth. The more likely people who engage with you want something out of you or from you. And I could totally see that as an extraordinarily lonely place to be, where you really have no real connection and no real authentic relationships. And I don't think people talk about it, because that's kind of like, well, why would you kind of, pee in the well of what everybody's aspiring to? But the reality of, I think, the emotional business case is that you don't know it until you actually do it. And that I think the rewards in the are bigger as a solopreneur for some people, and the boogeyman is a lot smaller. And what people don't realize is, it's that whole notion of you finally get the brass ring and you kind of lost your soul along the way, or you didn't realize what it was going to cost you. Because these aren't really articles that have been written or books that have been told, because so few people have really made it on either side of it. So.
Well, I'll give you one on the sort of the emotional business case. It's a very simple one. With the very rare exception, I don't wake up to an alarm clock.
Yes.
That's point A. That's just kind of an interesting one right there. Point B, you and I don't do commutes. Right?
Huge.
And the average American commutes for half an hour a day, which is nothing. If you take it to a bigger city, I don't have the data, but like in the part of the world that you live in, the part of the world that I live, it ain't a half hour a day. I mean, there's
easily 2 hours of my life back for me to do whatever I want.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's 2 times 5 is 10, right?
Amazing.
So that's 10 hours a week, right? When you peel that commute out, if it's the case you're describing, 10 hours a week, you say, okay, well, what would you do if somebody handed you 10 hours a week? So just that alone. Now, of course, it's juxtaposed with the uncertainty of, hey, maybe I only have 3 clients, and if I lose 1 or 2, shit goes bad. The economy might go soft. Those things are all spooky. But the interesting thing is, of course, it's a fallacy to think that we have any corporate security anyway.
Oh yeah, for sure. When to your last point, it's some of the big consulting firms, they're famous for their up or out strategies in terms of how they manage people. And the reality is, life is up or out. And if it's not, then it's kind of up or decay at some level, because you're just going to stagnate in some job. And, again, it's that, I think this was a thing about, like, if you are not, even if you have back to that testimonial and track record, if you don't have it for the last 20 years, you can still do it right now and then resurrect and get on the right path with it, right? But this notion of, would I worry about clients as a solopreneur or as a senior partner anywhere else? For sure, I'd worry about that. And
right.
And the thing that I think of it as, fear being, the avoidance of fear is not an option. It just doesn't exist anymore.
Right.
And I think the ability to live with and value fear in a way that keeps you sharp and helpful, and I think replace fear with passion and purpose of, like, what, if I don't have clients, then some of it is serendipity and circumstance, but some of it might be I'm not at my A game's not on. I haven't really thought of anything sharp enough or compelling enough to do that. And, that's something I can control and I can do something about, and it's going to be good either way. And I think that kind of, everything that you want in life is on the other side of fear. It's like, what the wave is coming and do you run or do you duck dive into it? And so, like, I think that's the whole point of it. Like, you realize, like, when we're in the water and the ocean, it's like, what, it's safer underneath all that turmoil, and just dive underneath it. And then you'll come out on the other side. Okay. And I think that's an important part of it. Funny thing on the commute bit is, you live in Santa Cruz, I live in Chicago, and I couldn't find one of my gloves, and I have these pair of gloves that I love, and I was like, I can't find this pair, this other glove. I have the left one and I have the right one. And then I realized, oh wait, I haven't needed my gloves. I'm like, why do I not need my gloves? It's freezing right now in Chicago. And it's like, well, I only needed my gloves when I'm standing out in the cold waiting for the train to get to work. And I'm either indoors or in a car, and I'm just not standing outside in the cold anymore. And
Yeah.
to your point about the commute, and this is the thing that I knew was driving me nuts about living in Chicago, and I stay here because my wife's family is here, and I love her dearly. And even though we're probably 8 years away from moving back to Hawaii.
How many years, Eddie?
I think 8. As soon as my youngest gets off to college or something like that. But it's these little things of like, I don't mind the cold when I'm indoors, or in my car. And
when the snow's very pretty from when you have a cup of coffee and you're watching it come down in your kitchen or wherever.
So I just feel like there's all these little Easter eggs that emotional business case is just so understated and so poorly misunderstood that I think that's the reason why when you meet somebody who has done this successfully, you're like, you got to do this. And it's hard to explain what it'll look like for you, but it's great. And, everything, confronting fear, got to do it. And it's going to be there no matter what, but you can, the reality of it is, what I talked about, circumstance and serendipity, the things that you can invest in and control. And what I realized, the stuff that's not there is the politics and everything else that can weigh heavily on you and your career and stuff at a larger company. And so I feel like I have more control over my life than if I was working somewhere else and stuff. So,
yeah. The other thing I love about what you've done, and you've shared this with me in the past, is, your kids and the ages that they were when you went solo. You made a proactive decision for yourself in your life with your wife that you wanted to be around more through their teenage years. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but that's how I remember it. Am I remembering this right?
Totally. And like just today, my son is he's a 5th grader. He's sick, so he's staying home from school. And my wife was, she had a bunch of stuff that she's going to do, and she's home, but like she knows that she can go do her business. And he's not like on his deathbed or anything, so he's got a fever, but he's like, look, Dad's talking to his buddy Christopher on a podcast, so unless it's really bad, don't bother him.
Exactly. Right, unless you're truly dying, you little shit.
But it's like, I think, just the little things like that make a huge difference. I think the fact that I'm home, or I can pick them up when they come home, that I cook for dinner, and because I remember it's these little things, like you can't really plan for, hey kiddo, let's have a heart to heart, and it's going to be a hallmark moment that we're going to remember forever. It just kind of happens, and the odds of it happening go up when you're just around and stuff. So I think that's been hugely valuable. And then one of the things I was surprised that the HBO folks let us put it in there, but that story that my daughter Audrey wrote, which I'll send you a copy. We're probably a month or 2 away from publishing this children's book with it and stuff, the yellow balloon one and stuff. But like, it was like a frightening wake up call when she wrote it, and I was like, oh my god. I mean, she says, again, not me, but who knows, right?
Yeah, where else is she going to get that example?
Exactly.
Yeah. And actually, I was just Googling as you were talking. I've never heard of this website before. DailyDodge.com says only 27% of Americans cook every day. And according to the USA Today, 90% of Americans don't like to cook. And yet, with commuting and all of the hee-haw around daily life and getting kids to school and back, cooking tends to be one of those things that go out the window. Yeah. And I used to live in a fairly cooking-free life, and then I married an Italian. And now I live in a very cooking rich life. Yeah. And look, I can't cook worth a shit. I can make eggs and oatmeal and toast. That's about my repertoire. But man, oh man, when you live in a world where people cook and they cook good food and they cook with good ingredients, oh my God, it's a game changer. But it is interesting. It seems like the pace of life, and particularly when you take the commute out, or when you put the commute in, you get rid of working out and going to the gym and training. Yeah, totally. That, and I think a lot of people get rid of eating properly.
Well, and it's funny as you mention it because I've done a lot of work for food and beverage companies, and you said like I think that 90% stat comes from another HBR piece that I wrote about cooking becoming the new sewing, because more of that's the way it's headed. It's to your point, because that's just the way I think the category is going to evolve. But for me personally, and it's kind of funny that I wrote that, because I got a lot of hate mail from people who are big cooks and chefs of like, don't say that, because, but I think for me to be able to cook for the family and cook for myself has been extraordinarily helpful for my own personal diet. I've been able to lose a little bit of weight, as you said, like work out more. And, it's stuff that, like, when I look back at my career, like I bet if you were to chart kind of my medical records against time, it was just kind of a slowly gradual, whatever the equivalent of global warming is, expansion of Eddie and stuff. But like the ability to take control over that.
Do you remember that line from Airplane? And Leon's getting larger. And Eddie's getting larger.
That's exactly what was happening.
Well, look, it's easy. You blow off your training in
Yeah.
the morning because you're busy.
Yeah.
You got to commute. You got shit going on, right?
Yeah.
You grab a fucking Cinnabon on the way to work, and you eat pizza or some breaded sandwich, and like it just. Listen, I've been there, man.
Well, I think you have the convenience thing, and then like I would estimate that a good 20 to 25% of the food and beverage category is emotional consumption. Right? It's not that
Wow.
I'm hungry, but it's I'm guilt eating or emotionally, whatever it is, right? And which goes to the root cause of this whole emotional business case of like when your life is probably somewhat in disorder emotionally, when you have other people's agendas kind of running your life at some level. And like I think about like some of the big ideas that people are trying to tackle around healthcare, and obviously huge cost to our government and burden on society, and huge risk for individuals. Is like it's hard for me to imagine how this country gets healthier, particularly as obesity is probably public enemy number one. It's the root of all health issues and the like and stuff. Without a meaningful chunk of the population doing what we're doing, and being able to take control of their lives in a way that eliminates commutes, gives them autonomy so that they can cook for themselves and exercise better in a way that works for them. Because I think that's been the other bit of it, has been not just that I'm exercising more and cooking more. It's, I think, the same notion of this personal IPO. Oh, I can tailor this the way that I want. Same kind of philosophy has come into other aspects of my life, is I don't have to follow a particular workout routine or diet. It's going to what works. And I think that joy of experimentation is really one of the great fun things about this. So.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I couldn't help but think, and of course, who knows what the correlation is, but you may have seen recently there's been some reports out that say, here's one from the New York Times, opioids car crashes are falling, and they're talking about the odds of dying in America. And today, Americans are more likely to die of an opioid overdose than a car crash.
Crazy. That's insane.
And so, look, I'm no doctor, God knows, but you got to believe part of the opioid crisis is people feel like they're in pain and they're taking things to dull that pain.
Yeah.
But I just found it incredible that it says, this article says, according to a report, your odds of dying of opioid overdose in America is 1 in 96. And the odds of dying in a vehicle crash is 1 in 103, which, by the way, I also found incredibly high. 1 in 103?
Yes. Yeah.
That's crazy.
It is crazy. And it's funny how I remember doing some work in automotive way back when, and like, people were surprised to hear that teenagers were really spiked high in wanting safety in cars, which surprised them. They thought they wanted it to go faster or look cooler or better sound systems. And I think for it probably still is now, but I think auto accidents was the number one cause of death for teenagers, to your point.
Yeah.
Right. And so, yeah, I think this, what you're getting at is, whether it's, I think what you're saying, Dr. Lochhead, because that also sounds good, is that, for a lot of people, if you have kind of a regular job and you're working for a company, that commuting is dangerous to your health. And not getting your emotional business case right is also dangerous to your health too, if you fall prey to addiction or some other way of medicating
Yes.
what you have going on. And I gotta believe too, like this notion of like, that, we can trust large companies to balance a profit motive with, whatever, paying, raising wages in a way that we can solve for the economic case. I mean, it's just kind of like people gotta, this path, I think the more that we can evangelize that it's a legit option, I think the beauty of it is that I think as an individual, I feel more fulfilled and better about myself, because the economics work great, but also the emotional business case is really outstanding too. And I think I think to your point, whether the opioid crisis or just kind of depression in general, I gotta believe that a large part of it is I'm scared to death about my finances because so few people have savings, or I'm either feel lonely in my career, or I'm fearful, or what have I done for that existential crisis, as you mentioned beforehand, I'm sure exists for a lot of people, versus you can do something that is quote unquote not prestigious, but if you're your own boss and you've personal IPO'd that, there's real pride that you can feel there too, right? You don't have to be orthopedic surgeon, whatever and stuff. So
yeah. I'm also another factor that's interesting to me. I was just looking at it to get it right. So recently, my buddy Jordan Harbinger had on his podcast, episode 126, a guy named Dr. Matthew Walker, who's a professor of neuroscience and psychology at Berkeley. And so they were talking about sleep. And there's a whole bunch of shit about sleep I had no idea about. And his Dr. Walker's point was, driving tired is more dangerous than driving drunk.
Oh, yes.
Because if you're drunk, at least what happens is your reaction times are less. If you're tired, there is no reaction because you're asleep when you hit the car or whatever in front of you, right?
That's a good way of putting it.
So you don't react. And he gave some stats, I don't have them off the top of my head, but of the percentage of Americans that are not getting enough sleep, and it's virtually the vast majority of adult Americans, right? So I think all that plays in. And I guess the meta point in all of this to me, Eddie, is what I believe is people should design their careers in the context of their life.
Yes.
And I think what we're trying to share with people here is, look, if you come to a place for whatever reason, whether it's the political bullshit, whether it's the economic side, whether it's wanting to be closer to your kids, whatever it is, that you should view career design and life design is the same thing, because to your point, our motivations are the same. There's not one Eddie that wants to be with his kids and another Eddie that wants to do well in his career, right? It's the same Eddie trying to figure out how to make it all work in a way that truly works, as opposed to that makes you nuts. And so I love this idea of taking a big step back and saying, okay, where am I in my career? Whether I'm 25, 35, 45, 50, where am I, right? And what's the right next best move for me? Am I winning this game of musical chairs called moving up the corporate ladder? Am I on teams that I love? Because for huge parts of my career, talking to me about going solo, I would have said, hey, stick it in your ear, man. I'm too busy building this company, this category, being on this team, doing this stuff, flying all over. And it was very, very satisfying. And for some people, they want to continue to do that. I know many people who they love that, right? And they're masters at that.
Yeah.
And then some of us get to a place where it's like, hey, you know what? I want to do something different in my life, and therefore work needs to be a different thing.
Yeah.
And this notion that there's economic downside is real. However, there's a flip side, which is if you can pull off a personal IPO, you can actually make this better.
Yeah.
And then the other one is, for all the distress and concern that this might cause, there's the joy and the bliss of being able to reclaim and take control of your life and really execute against this emotional business case.
Yeah. Well, it's what I think when I hear what you were saying just there is, in many respects, it's people settling, right? It's no issue working for a company and working in a team, but it should be awesome and amazing. And if it's not that, then you ought to be working on your personal IPO. And frankly, I would imagine, I mean, I know I I gotta believe you continually get pinged for jobs and coming back, let's come out of this and that. And in the same way that a lot of the, companies out there they'll go public, then they go private, they go public. I can't see why that's not the reality of the top
Sure.
performers, is they just go back and forth. And that frankly, you should always be working on your personal IPO, because that might be the best way to solve for the musical chairs bit, right? There's no greater, like there's a guy by the name of Keith Levy, who's he's a Mars executive, global president of business development. And one of the best things about him is that he was the CMO and head of sales at Anheuser-Busch, and life was very good for him post-acquisition, let's put it that way.
Yeah.
But is that, he just could say, I don't need this job. I do it because I like it. I do it because I want to do something legendary, to use your words. And if you disagree with me, I'm happy taking my marbles and going home. And
Yes.
I think that ability to affect change that he has is so extraordinary. I think in at some level, that hinge of that, the personal IPO is an evergreen thing that we're working on, that it's the best way to solve for the musical chairs, that you should plan on going back and forth over time.
Yes.
Is probably the right answer, and stuff that, I remember you lamenting about entrepreneurship going down amongst young people and millennials and stuff, is that, I think the more that people can be, they should teach this in high school, is that entrepreneurship can be capital E and lowercase e, as you said.
Yeah.
Right? And that this is a fantastic option for you, and you got to think about that. And, and I think there's kind of like addressing the narrative that I think we're doing now, talking about it at the conceptual and the high level there. And I think there's also the very practical level of, I love what you were talking about on the sleep side, is that one of the best things in the last 2 years for me is I'm getting consistently 7-8 hours of sleep. And for 20 years, I was at 4, 5, 6 and stuff.
Yeah.
And I just kind of lived with it, and you can live with it there. But we talked about your emotional health, your physical health. How much of that is just solved by getting a good night's sleep, right? I mean, just
A
sleeping.
lot of it.
Yeah, a lot of it better. And I've just seen, so many capital E entrepreneurs out there. There's a guy, Peter Kelly, who has a startup called Insomnosolve, as a wearable device that has a clinical trial from Mass General, where he uses impulses, like those seasickness bands that you wear on your wrist and stuff.
Right.
Well, his Mass General clinical says that you'll fall asleep faster 40% and stay asleep longer 40%, because it creates a sensation of rocking and stuff. And
Wow.
all these things that are being monetized around sleep, you talk about, actually we've covered off kind of the major, category design opportunities for somebody out there. Solve for traffic and commuting.
Right.
Solve for emotional health in a way that's not just kind of this fragmented counseling industry that doesn't make any money and the like. And then solve for sleep. And, that those are worthy things to
Those are
solve
big
for.
things, yeah.
Big things as a team and this and that. And if not that, solve for it in a little E fashion for yourself. And it's kind of like, you should, to settle for, I'm SVP of whatever, not doing anything amazing, that's the worst case option. You should be doing something bodacious with a team that you're thrilled with and you would go to the mattresses for, or you should be doing this for yourself.
Amen. Hallelujah. Is there anything anything else you'd like to touch on before we wrap, Dr. Yoon?
No, I can't wait to, hopefully there'll be more opportunities to engage with all the people out there. I think there's so many great stories, and I think so much more for us to learn about it. So I'm just thrilled that we had a chance to talk about it.
Me too, Eddie.
The conversation going.
I can't believe the interest and conversation this piece has sparked up, and I'm glad. It shows that we're at a very interesting point. And I guess the one other thing I would say that it maybe is self-evident, but we talk about it a little bit at the end of Niche Down, how there's a niche NATO coming, and part of it, of course, is driven by technology, right? And just this technology that you and I are using right now, Zoom. You can be in Chicago and I can be in Santa Cruz, and so technology is helping to remove lots of barriers where heretofore you couldn't scale. And so if you're a micro niche consultant, if you're an expert in funeral parlor design,
yeah.
Maybe the category potential in Southwest Louisiana for that is not very big, and so you can't really strike out on your own. But of course, the technology changes everything. So not only is everything I think we talked about today worthy of consideration, I think the power of technology to reach, even if it's a very small potential category potential of potential customers or clients, we can pinpoint those folks in a way today that you never could before. You could be like my buddy Joe Sanek, who's like he's got the podcast, The Practice of the Practice, and he's like the guru to people with small private, whether it's mental health practices or massage therapy or physical therapy or like that. I don't know that you could have been him without the ability to scale into that niche with the technology. And so I think that blows open a whole other part of this that I think is very worthy of consideration as well.
And I think to your point about the technology, like that is, as much of a layup from a investor business case perspective of, any company that's going to be innovating technology to enable this niche NATO, as you were describing it, right? Clear winners, right? Because you think about how much economic value is being created by simply just doing that personal IPO. You take what you made before and you increase it by 50%, and everybody's happier.
Right.
Everybody's happier with it, right? Like, it's to me like what the thing that we should work on next is like, what is the upside to the total GDP if this is truly unlocked, right? If a full third of the labor force goes solo, and they make 50% more, but they create, 500% more value for everybody that's there. I mean, this could be very well, forget Facebook and the like. This is kind of the next revolution of value creation, not only from an economic standpoint, but you think about the emotional well-being so maybe the U.S. could finally climb the charts and knock off like Denmark or whatever, Scandinavian countries, the happiest out there and like stuff. But
not to get too metaphysical about all of it, but there is an interesting correlation. My buddy Mike Maples Jr., who I think is one of the smartest guys I know, he really believes strongly, and I see this correlation in a lot of places. Former Navy SEAL and now president of McChrystal Group, Chris Fussell, explained this to me, and of course General McChrystal himself did, about how our military had to go from a command and control model to a network-based model.
Yes.
Essentially, I'm way simplifying, but essentially that's what I learned from them. And Mike really believes, that the future of business is not a corporation as we understand it, that was essentially constructed around the Industrial Revolution, that the future structure of corporations is as networks.
Yes.
And so if you connect the dots on those things, you come to this place that say, well, maybe the definition of work is, on one level, there's a hierarchy that has some command and control and sets direction and incentives and goals and, and provides some resources and whatever. And then there are these very autonomous nodes in the network. By the way, when we had T.J. Welsh, who is a retired fire chief, who is one of the architects of our procedures and policies in California for fighting wildfires, very similar kind of thing. 5,000 firefighters show up in one day. You can't wait for them to all get trained. You can't wait for them to all be told what to, they immediately move into action. And there's this centralized control, but highly decentralized network. So anyway, if you take it all the way up to that and you say, well, what that might mean is exactly what you just said becomes truer and truer, because we all become nodes, if you will, in networks. And just like you and I collaborate on some percentage of things we do together, not a huge percentage, but a few things that we like to do together, write and talk to some of these clients and some of that stuff. And then you go off and do all your other things with other people, and I do that too. And so we're in our own network. We come together on things that make sense, and we go apart and do our own thing. And it's very much like how Mike, I think, envisions the future of a company, very much how Cal Fire fights fires, very much how the military now is dealing with military threats. So it's sort of an interesting network-based paradigm to work that may be emerging here.
Well, I love that kind of network vision of the future, and I think the last thought that I have in my mind is, in the same way that you rebranded your podcast, and we've talked about this, is, follow your different, right? To me, as I've been reflecting on it, it's your best shot at getting each individual's unique contribution to the economy, to society, and that on the belief that different is good. And the reason why it's good is that everybody has a unique makeup, and you were created to contribute uniquely to the world in some way, shape, which will never get there until you embrace your different.
Yeah.
And when you can make a unique contribution to the world, that's when you find your joy. Because we've talked about this idea, right? And I think I've been thinking about what does the algebra of this actually look like? And that's my feeling of it, is that in as much as, hey, great investment case to the future of the world is a set of networks and the like with it here. But that emotional business case, which I think is the core that is really resonating with the people out there, is that, follow your different, maximize your chances for that unique contribution. And, no amount of money and no amount of celebration can compensate for that feeling of, I made a difference and it was uniquely me. And that's where I think that joy really emerges from. So.
Amen. Hallelujah. All right, Eddie, that's an amazing place to kick out of this one. Thank you, brother. Thank you for collaborating on this awesome HBR piece, and I'm so glad it's made the difference that it seems to be making. And I can't wait to talk to you again soon.
Great. Thanks, man.
Thanks, Eddie. Whew, the masterful Eddie Yoon. I'm so stoked I get to have him in my life and get to share him with you. Now, is it grow time in your business? And in particular, I want to talk to folks who are maybe in the manufacturing world, because NetSuite's product management and manufacturing capabilities allow you to run your manufacturing ops like a boss. From sales orders to work order processing to routing or routing, depending on your religious beliefs, scheduling, order fulfillment, figuring out what your product costing is. NetSuite's manufacturing capability provides real-time visibility into every step of your production. As a matter of fact, NetSuite is considered the #1 company in cloud ERP. ERP, of course, being enterprise resource planning, with manufacturing sitting as a critical component. NetSuite is the platform for how you build products, get your products to market quickly, and cost-effectively deliver them anywhere in the world with an end-to-end manufacturing software solution designed for your entire business in the cloud. Yes, the cloud, people. So for listeners of this podcast, NetSuite has an awesome offer. Go to netsuite.com/different, and there you can set up to have a free growth review with an expert in your industry, manufacturing or otherwise for that matter. So go to netsuite.com/different to set up your growth review today. Also want to let you know, if you want to send us email, send it to blackhole@lochhead, lochhead.com. If you want to follow me on Twitter or Instagram, I'm at lochhead. And also go to lochhead.com. It's our brand new website. We put a ton of work into it. And if you subscribe to this podcast on Apple Podcasts or Player FM or Stitcher or Spotify or Outcast or many of the others, Podbeam, that's awesome. Thank you for doing that. And we don't know you exist when you subscribe, because those platforms don't tell us you're there. So if you want us to know you exist, subscribe on lochhead.com. And here's the thing I could tell you. A, we don't sell your name to nobody, ever. B, we don't send out that many emails. We haven't sent out an email in over a month. So we only email you shit when we think there's something important to say. We are going to get our email program back on track. So if you haven't gotten an email from us, it's not personal. We're going to get back on a weekly schedule here sometime soon. But suffice it to say, we are not going to be bombarding you with crapola when you subscribe on lochhead.com. All right. We would like to thank the incredible Eddie Yoon, our guest on today's episode. Check him out at eddiewoodgrow.net. That's Eddie Woodgrow, all one word, .net. We'd also like to thank our good friends at Paradigm Sport Athlete Training Center in beautiful Santa Cruz, California. This is Joey Wolf's business. He was recently on the podcast telling us how to get and stay fit. Check out paradigmsport.com. The #1 Amazon bestseller, Niche Down, How to Become Legendary by Being Different, by Heather Clancy and myself. Check out Niche Down on Amazon today. The incredible nonprofit started by my dear friend, the incredible, the incomparable, the handsome, the talented Tim Rode. Check out onelifefullylived.org. where we help you dream, plan, and live your best life. Now, are you an entrepreneur? Are you working in an entrepreneurial business? Then check out growwire.com. This is the new place for stories of innovation and growth on the internet for the entrepreneurial and innovative of mind, so to speak. Check out growwire.com. There's a podcast that I've been stoked to be on. There's a YouTube channel, and there's a lot of great articles up there. Now, are you somebody who recently went solo, or maybe you have a solopreneur business or a small business, but you need some help? Why not get a virtual assistant and leverage the power of virtual assistants at bottleneck.online. That's bottleneck, all one word, .online. They're my friends at Bottleneck Virtual Assistants. Will take some pressure out, get some good work done for you, and allow you to focus on what matters. Now, speaking of what matters, when somebody Googles your company, what they see next often is your website. And so, yeah, look, I know it's 2019, but there's still a lot of people out there who don't realize that the website is the first thing that people see. It's the first impression. Our friends at Atranet will help you turn your website into your best spokesmodel. Check out atre.net today, particularly if you're in the B2B space. And another nonprofit we love, the Front Row Foundation. Check out frontrow.org. These folks help people who are suffering from potentially life-threatening diseases create moments that matter. Check out frontrowfoundation.org today. All right, I want to remind you that this oddcast is the sole property of the Lochhead Oddcast Network, and we would love it if you shared the shit out of it. Make no mistake, your shares on social media are the biggest way you can say thank you if for some reason you wanted to say thank you. All rights do remain disturbed. We must warn you that this oddcast is clearly produced in a studio that does contain nuts. Teach kids growth strategy. Remember to always shower with your friend. Don't be lame. Get out of the passing lane. The left lane is not a cruising lane here, people. Listen to Joan Jett. Practice turning off your smartphone. Only buy pasture-raised, free-range eggs. Thank you so much, Candy Dandy. I love you, Mom and Dad. And hey, Colin. This oddcast really ties the room together, doesn't it? Today, our deepest apologies go to Richard C. Kelly. Richard C. Kelly, chairman of Pacific Gas and Electric Company. Sorry, Dick. We just ran out of time for you. That's it. Thank you so much, my friends. It really means the world to me that you'd invest part of your life with this podcast. Until next time, follow your different.